Welcome to the Feisty Women's Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Gross, Ironman champion, PhD in women's history, and founder and CEO of Feisty Media. I started this show because I wanted to cut through the BS of diet culture and fitness culture and actually learn from high-achieving women at the top of their game who have figured out how to feel and perform their best at every stage of life. So I chat with experts, elite athletes, and leaders who have learned to succeed despite the massive gender data gap in exercise and medical science and product development. Every episode is filled with information, advice, and anecdotes that will help you fulfill your potential as an athlete, mom, leader, or business owner. And listen up. If you don't subscribe to our Women's Performance newsletter, you are definitely missing out. It's totally free. So head over to womensperformance.com and subscribe now. That's womensperformance.com. This podcast is a production of Feisty Media. Hello, Feisty friends. Sarah Gross here. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Women's Performance Podcast. For the next 4 weeks, you are in for a treat. I am extremely happy to present a 4-part mini-series all about how our female hormones affect our performances in sport and life. The series is called Hormonal. And I love that name because who among us has not been talked down to and disregarded with the use of that word? Oh, just ignore Sarah. She's hormonal. Or you know how women get sometimes. They are so hormonal. At Feisty, we are all about reclaiming language, turning it on its head and saying, yeah, we are hormonal and it's amazing. And we are going to harness those hormones to get the best out of our bodies. The mini-series is hosted by 2 women who are truly subject experts. First, double board certified obstetrician and reproductive endocrinologist Dr. Carla DiGirolamo, who has been featured in Boston Magazine as one of Boston's best doctors every year since 2019. Carla is joined by Feisty's own Selene and Yeager, who has been hosting the Hit Play Not Pause podcast since 2020 and has conducted over 160 interviews with leading experts and top athletes in the perimenopause and menopause space. Combined with her background as a health and science journalist, Selene is great at reading the research and translating it into actionable steps for active women. During these 4 episodes, over the next 4 weeks, you will learn everything you need to know to work with your body and perform. Episode 1 covers all the basics about your hormones, whether you really need to sync your training routine with your menstrual cycle, how to know when and why you might need hormone testing, and what happens when your hormones start fluctuating in your 40s or flatten out in your 50s and beyond. In episode 2, Selene and Carla cover hormonal contraceptives. We all want to know about birth control, don't we? And how it affects our training. They cover pregnancy and fertility as they relate to our physical activity. And in episode 3, the 2 discuss common hormonal problems like PCOS and endometriosis. And if all of your questions are not answered after those 3 episodes, you can ask. So episode 4 answers listener questions about hormones. I've seen some of the questions that have already come in and they are so good. If you have a question and it's before the end of April 2024, just head to the show notes, click on the link and ask away. So, for everyone who is sick of the narrative that women's hormones are a curse instead of a blessing, we are here for you. And together, we will learn how amazing it actually is to be hormonal.
Okay. Carla, welcome back for the final episode of the Hormonal series.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been so much fun.
It has been fun. It's been really fun. And we have a slew of questions, so I want to get right to them. I do want to say that we did have a couple on hormonal contraceptives that, you can check out episode 2, where we covered hormonal contraceptives for performance. And if it was something that we didn't cover, we will address it here. So let's get right to it. What do you think?
Awesome. Sounds great.
Okay. The first question is from somebody who is 60 years old, has been on hormone therapy for 10 years, and their provider wants to reduce their levels because of increased risks, as they have told them, for breast cancer and other things that rise after 60. And she says, is this true for everyone? Do I have to do this? Is it different because I'm an athlete? Do I really need to do it now? I have a race coming up. And I would say you probably don't need to do it before your race. I mean, it's not urgent. But, let's talk a bit about this, because this is a really timely one, because that big study on hormone therapy after 65 literally just came out. So I think the takeaway was it's largely safe, but it was pretty clear that the risks, especially of breast cancer, do increase with higher doses, especially in longer use. What do you have to say here?
So I think there's a lot of layers to this question. I think the first nuance that we need to talk about is the age piece. So it's very different being 60 and having been on hormone therapy for X number of years as compared to starting hormone therapy after 60.
Right.
And the reason is because when we start hormone therapy on people in general, and I think the same holds true for birth control pills as well in reproductive age women, is that if you're going to throw a clot or have a major incident, it's usually going to happen within the first couple of years. So when you are first starting it after 60, those instances are a lot higher than if you first started it at 52. But if you started it at 52 and you're chugging along and you're still low risk and doing great at 60, according to the most recent North American Menopause Society position statement, there is no arbitrary cutoff for having to stop hormone therapy. What drives that is what the risk-benefit equation looks like. What are we taking the hormone therapy for? Say it's hot flashes, and say these hot flashes are debilitating. Well, that's a huge benefit because we know hormone therapy is effective for hot flashes. And if you're not a smoker, if you're otherwise in good health and you don't have a clot risk or have thrown a clot or, have active breast cancer going on, then the benefits outweigh the risks, and there's no reason to stop it.
Is there a reason to reduce it, though? Because that's actually the question that she's wrestling with. Her doctor would like to reduce it. And if I'm reading that latest study, and it was a large one, correct, like longer duration on the higher doses does seem, and again, it's not like it's a giant risk, but it does seem to be a more increased risk of breast cancer, particularly with long duration use over 65 at higher doses. And that wasn't seen quite as much with lower doses. So would that be a reason to bring down the dose at all?
So I think the goal is to be on the least amount of medication that gets the job done.
Okay.
In general, that's true, no matter how old you are, because there is risk to hormone therapy at any age. And so if you can be on the lowest dose that's going to be effective for treating your symptoms, then that's the goal. So what I often have women come to me with is that, look, I've been on this for a really long time. I had hot flashes 10 years ago. Am I still going to have them? Can I try to get off this? And so what we do is we wean them. And you lower the dose. And if you're still doing great, wonderful. Let's try to lower it again. And then you might lower it the second time and find that, okay, hot flashes are coming back. So now you know where you need to be. Now you know what the threshold is and where that lowest dose is. But I don't see anything wrong with trying to reduce it because, she may not need as much hormone therapy as she did 5-10 years ago because the body changes from early menopause to late menopause. There's a lot of changes going on. So she may not need those doses. But it shouldn't be just, cut and dry. You got to decrease the dose, come off, regardless of, how disrupted your symptoms in your life are.
Yeah.
The goal is to manage the symptoms, but do it in the most conservative way.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember you saying on some conversation we had that it doesn't take much when women want to stay on it for bone health in particular. I'm thinking those are pretty low doses that can maintain bone health, correct?
Oh, incredibly low doses. It's actually a patch dose made specifically for bone health. It's the 0.025 dose. like just for reference, the standard starting dose for menopausal hormone therapy is usually 0.05. So this is like half that. And that is enough to really make a difference for bone health. So, sometimes when people don't have hot flashes, but they do have a history of osteopenia, or they have a high family risk of osteoporosis, just slap that patch on at 0.025. And, there's even a debate of whether or not you need progesterone if you have a uterus when it's that low. But I tend to be more conservative. There's not a lot of data on whether or not you need it. There's some, some suggestion you may not, but I don't think I'd want to take the chance.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's the skinny on that super low dose.
Cool. And for everybody's knowledge, I'm going to put whenever we're referencing studies, I'm going to drop in the show notes as always, just so you can check them out yourself. Okay, so we have one that I know that you were looking into that was interesting about tapering for big races and competitions. What can an athlete do if a taper brings on a period and the PMS that comes with it? And I know you had a conversation about this. What are your thoughts here?
This is a really interesting question. So this goes back to a lot of the low energy availability conversations that we've had. So you're training for a race and you're in that phase where, you're probably, at a weight that at your performance weight, your fight weight, so to speak, and your nutrition is so highly fine-tuned at this point that you're probably in an adaptive LEA state. And what I mean by adaptive is that it's a short-term state that you're in that will optimize your performance for the event that's coming up soon. And then once the event is over, you go back to a more balanced situation and everything is fine. So this is very common in weight class athletes, wrestlers, boxers, fighters who have to make weight to fight in their class. Same thing with physique athletes who have to achieve a certain aesthetic on the day of their event. And so they go into an adaptive LEA state to achieve that goal, and then they come out of it after. And athletes do this all the time. And as long as it's short term, it's okay. So when one is tapering, that's what's happening, is that the intensity is dialing down a little bit, eating might change a little bit, and boom, the periods come back. So I was speaking to our awesome and amazing CEO of Feisty, former pro triathlete, Sarah Gross. And this is something that she shared what she did that was very effective. And what she did was she tapered, instead of like 2 weeks before, she tapered a little earlier than that, like a month before. And then what she did, she would get a period, and then she would just create another block of training that wasn't like high intensity training, but she'd create another training block that was enough to allow her to taper, but enough to maintain that intensity. But she did the main part of the taper that brought her cycles back well ahead of the event. Yeah. And I thought this was fascinating because I am not an endurance athlete. So I don't know personally from my own experience how to taper. So I was very grateful to have this conversation with her. So that's what she said she did. She tapered earlier and then stuck in like a moderate training block up until the race. And she said that worked really well for her.
Wow, that's interesting. I never had that experience with that. So I'm glad that Sarah has shared that with us.
I was grateful for that too, because that was just last night.
So we have and I do hear this next question quite a few times, somebody who's saying that they get exercise-induced inflammation, that they've had it since they were 47. The more intense the workout, the worse it seems to be, causing fluid retention. Wondering if there's something connected with menopause and hormones here. She's postmenopausal at 57. And this is definitely something I know that people struggle with, and I'm not sure if there's a hormonal component.
Well, I think there's two components. The hormonal component is that now that we don't have the buffer of our circulating estrogen, progesterone, our cycling menstrual cycles, now that we don't have that buffer between your energy availability and your stress response system, Now, any kind of fluctuations in training energy imbalance is going to be amplified by what feels like a million, and it's going to jack your stress response. And one of the big components of the stress response is the activation of the inflammatory system. Because the reason for that, okay, so think about evolutionarily. So our stress response system is designed to be able to combat the bear in the woods that's about to eat us. And so what the body does is it ramps up all these hormones that allows you to physically perform at your peak, but it also amplifies your immune system because it knows that there's going to be a good fight. There's probably going to be some bloodshed, some wounds, some injury, and we got to be ready to heal that injury and prevent infection. So the immune system automatically gets ramped up when the stress response gets ramped up. And so when the immune system gets ramped up, so do all the cytokines and cofactors that cause pain and inflammation. So what I would probably suggest for this person is to look at two things. One is, how are they recovering? When we go through perimenopause into early menopause, then late menopause, we really have to pay more attention to warm up, cool down, tissue care, and all of those recovery metrics. Because if the stress response isn't coming back to normal, that immune system is not shutting off. And so that leads to all that pain and inflammation. The other thing to look at is the energy availability. I can't harp on LEA enough because it is such a rampant problem.
Yeah.
And, we could, when we were cycling in our 30s and 40s, we could get away with having these imbalances and not much would become of it. But when you lose those cycles and you lose that buffer, it's not so forgiving. And so that's kind of where we have to be more aware of our recovery, our fueling, and just dialing down that stress response. Even like just normal life stress, that's really important. If you're going through a divorce or a move or whatever, that's going to make it even harder for your stress response to come down. So you got to kind of take a step back and take a look at everything and see, what could be activating the stress response.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's really good advice. I mean, I know that is. It can be hard to manage it, especially during hard training blocks, but that's when you have to pay that much more attention to all of that for sure. So person asks, I would like to know about hormonal changes in asthma. I've never had asthma as a child, was diagnosed with it at age 47. I'm a 4-time Ironman. And now you have to use an inhaler every day. My asthma specialist says it is not exercise-induced, just plain old asthma. And I actually just wrote about this, and it's going to be I work ahead, so I don't know if it's the newsletter that's out tomorrow or what. It'll be out by the time this episode comes out, I think. But there is actually a connection between new onset asthma and asthma-like respiratory symptoms that can increase post-menopause. So I don't hear that you're post-menopause at 47. It sounds like but I don't know that. Maybe you are, or you're definitely in perimenopause. But there can be a hormonal connection to some breathlessness, some asthma, and some asthma-like symptoms. So I hope your inhaler is helping. Carla, do you have any other thoughts? I mean, this was one, man, when I dig into the research, there isn't a whole lot more to offer, Yeah,
I have not seen this clinically. I have not come across it in the research myself. I mean, admittedly, I haven't taken a deep dive specifically on this topic, but, I try to review all of the position statements and things that I come across with my active women and athletic patients. And I can honestly say I have not come across this one.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I will say there's also but I'm not at 47. I don't think you're running into that quite yet. There was a systematic review on lung function decline in aging adults, and that was probably a little older. And both sexes decline their lung function with age, but they're definitely, and I'll drop those in the show notes too, so you can share those with your doctor if it matters. And I don't know if hormone therapy is something to explore for this, but it is, there is a connection and there have been studies looking into it. So,
well, one thought I just had as you were talking about that is progesterone can create a sense of breathlessness. So one of the things that pregnant women talk about is that feeling of breathlessness. And this is in the first trimester.
I had it bad in the first trimester. Yeah. That's how I knew something was up. Yeah. I'm like, what is happening? I would go running and I'm just like, I can't breathe. What is happening?
Yeah, you feel like you're running on top of at 14,000 feet altitude.
And you're doing, it was doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And progesterone for some reason, I don't understand it biologically, but I know it's very apparent that it has this effect. And in perimenopause, when we're sometimes having these loop cycles because the cycles are getting irregular, and a loop cycle is where kind of like your follicular phase keeps looping before it actually ovulates. And so what can wind up happening is that you could ovulate 3 eggs, and then you have this surge of progesterone. And so this is why in perimenopause, some women complain of terrible breast and nipple tenderness.
Yes.
It's because of these loop cycles and the progesterone that's getting jacked to the moon when you have a loop cycle. So what's possible is that if she's going through a time of a loop cycle and she's got a lot of progesterone on board because the cycle's dysfunctional, that could be creating this feeling of breathlessness. I wouldn't expect this after menopause because the cycles have stopped. But if she's peri, then that could be part of it.
That's interesting. And I know that this has come up in the group a few times where people are like, I cannot catch my breath. This is a brand new thing. And that, I think, definitely sounds like it could be what they're experiencing. That's interesting.
Just one more thing to add to the list.
Yeah, just so many things.
As a lifelong runner and triathlete turned CrossFitter, I am stoked to announce that the athletic eyewear brand Tifosi Optics has joined us as a partner here at Feisty Media. Tifosi sports glasses hit all the marks for athletes. They're shatterproof polybicarbonate, so the lenses not only reduce glare, but also offer scratch resistance, which I 100% need. They stay in place when you are moving. The hydrophilic rubber nose pads actually get more grippy the more you sweat, so they are secure and don't slide down your face even when you're running in hot conditions. No matter what sport you do, Tifosi has shades for you. Whether you love tennis, fishing, pickleball, running, cycling, or just hanging out on the beach. They are super reasonably priced, which I love, so I can have multiple pairs that go with any outfit. And of course, Feisty listeners get a special discount. So head on over to tifosioptics.com and use the code FM20. FM as in Feisty Media to get 20% off your order. That's FM20 at tifosioptics.com. I'll put a link in the show notes to make it easy for you. Building muscle can be tough, and gains can be so slow, even for those of us who do a lot of strength training. As an ex-endurance athlete who is now in perimenopause, I know this all too well. It can be frustrating to put in the time in the gym and not see the results I'm looking for. That's why it's super important to take the right supplements at the right time. One of those supplements is essential amino acids, which are needed to trigger muscle protein synthesis. Muscle protein synthesis happens when you eat high-quality protein, like eggs or whey. And by supplementing with additional essential amino acids, you can make sure you are getting the full benefit of your training sessions. Targeted essential amino acid formulas can be up to 4 times more effective than just eating protein. I've been taking amino acids for almost a year, and in combination with eating quality protein and a couple other supplements, I have managed to turn the tides on age-related muscle loss, which starts at 30 for women, by the way, and I have continued to make strength gains as I head towards 50. AminoCo has been a long-time sponsor of Feisty Media and has supported all of our brands and podcasts over the years. I recommend starting with AminoCo Perform, and you can grab some at aminoco.com/performance. If you enter the code PERFORMANCE, you will save 30% and receive a free gift if it is your first purchase. Give it a try and let me know how it goes. That's aminoco.com/performance and use the code PERFORMANCE to save 30%. Endurance sports should be accessible to everyone, right? That's why we are so excited to be partnering with Motive. Motive is one of the fastest growing training apps in the world today, with thousands of amateur athletes signing up every month and a nearly perfect 4.9 star rating in the App Store. You are not a template, and your training plan should not be either. Prepare for running races, triathlons, cycling events, duathlons, or swim runs, however your season schedule shapes up, and get training written by some of the best coaches in the world in each discipline who know what it takes to help amateur athletes reach their goal on race day. The app takes the training written by those experts and then creates the most optimal training plan for your schedule, abilities, and goals. Plus, the training is fully customized to your race schedule, how much you can train each week, your current abilities, and the goals you want to achieve in your race. You can use the app for free as long as you want, or get all the upgraded features from the app for just $19.99 a month. But as a Feisty listener, you can sign up at mymotive.com and use the code Feisty for 2 months of full premium access. That's right, you get 2 months of premium for free. So you quite literally have nothing to lose. So head over to mymotive.com, mymotiv.com, and use the code Feisty, Feisty. And on a personal note, I know the founder of Motive, and he is driven to make triathlon and all endurance sports more accessible for the athletes who care about their performance, but who aren't quite ready for a full-time personal coach. If that sounds like you, definitely try the app for 2 months for free. You literally have nothing to lose.
So there's a question about taking micronized progesterone rectally or vaginally, and if that is a thing. And there's some, the author of this question is like, some of her friends say that they use it that way. She hears that maybe you don't use it that way. Let's engage this and set the record straight about micronized progesterone.
We've been doing it safely for decades in the fertility space. There are FDA-approved products that are micronized progesterone specifically for vaginal use. Crenone is one of them. Endometrin is another one. And it's micronized progesterone. And so here's the thing. So when you use progesterone vaginally, or we don't usually use it rectally, vaginally is fine. It doesn't absorb into the circulation. What it does is it gives you a high dose of progesterone locally to the uterus. And if you drag out an anatomical textbook and you look at the uterus and the cervix and the vagina, you will see this huge anastomotic network of blood vessels. And so what happens is the progesterone gets absorbed into those blood vessels locally, and it gets sucked up by the uterus. And so when we are treating patients with progesterone during infertility treatment, we use it vaginally. We can't monitor the levels because it doesn't get absorbed into the circulation. So if you are taking progesterone for uterine protection, you can certainly use it that way. It is perfectly safe. Like I said, FDA approved for that. IUD works the exact same way. It delivers progesterone locally. If, say, you're taking progesterone for sleep, say, that's not the way to do it, because again, it doesn't get absorbed systemically. If you're taking it for sleep, then you're going to want to take it orally. So A, yes, it's safe to take vaginally, done all the time. But B, you have to think about why you're taking the progesterone. For uterine protection, oral or vaginal, or even transdermal in some preparations like Combi Patch are fine. But if you're doing it for systemic effects with sleep and even hot flash treatment, you want to make sure you're getting it systemically. So oral is the way to go.
Yeah, and she mentions that a friend of hers has a hard time, is progesterone sensitive. So it seems like that might be a good solution for somebody who, you hear people who have mood problems and that with progesterone. Would that help with that?
It would be great for that, because usually the mood symptoms happen because it's systemic and it's going to the brain, and it's, wreaking havoc with the serotonin system. So yeah, I mean, it gives you uterine protection without the mood symptoms. So I do it a lot in people who otherwise have systemic side effects. And the only reason I need it is for uterine protection. So yeah, it's a great route to go.
Excellent. So we had another question, but we answered it with the previous one about peri and postmenopausal women to prevent bone loss and hormone doses. And we answered that you actually don't need a very high dose. And you might be able to use a very low dose to get that benefit, which is very cool.
Yeah, and the only one thing I want to emphasize with that is that hormone therapy or estrogen therapy is for prevention of osteoporosis, not treatment. If you have osteoporosis, you really should seek treatment with the effective medications for that.
Yep.
Estrogen alone is not going to do it. Now, one thing that's true is that you can combine estrogen with a lot of the traditional bone remodeling agents, and that can work together beautifully. So if you have osteoporosis, if you go on one of these bone remodeling agents, you don't have to stop your hormone therapy, but you don't want to go on hormone therapy alone if you have osteoporosis, because it's not going to be effective.
Very good distinction. And it's not FDA approved for the prevention or for the treatment.
For the treatment, but it is for the prevention. You got it.
Yep. Why am I so lazy to train on days when I'm near my period?
Everybody responds to their periods a little bit differently. I think period tracking is a very valuable tool. And you might find that if you do keep a symptom diary, that lots of things correlate with your cycle. If you think about what's happening during that phase right before your period is when your body is preparing for implantation. Okay, so, whether you're having a cycle at 47 or whether you're having a cycle at 27, your body doesn't really know the difference. A period's happening and pregnancy could potentially happen. Your body only kind of thinks in that tunnel vision, for procreation. So you might be experiencing kind of an exaggerated response to that stage where your body is automatically kind of trying to dial down. When we talk about timing training with your menstrual cycle, when we talk about training in the luteal phase, it's usually more mobility type stuff, lower intensity type stuff, just because that's what the body is preparing itself for. So you might just have an exaggerated response to this, just like some women have PMS that's terrible and other women don't. The cycle's still happening. It's just the response to the cycle is different. So it might be just different. But again, because this stage of life, we are so much more sensitive to recovery and sleep and fueling that we really have to look at those things first. And if you can optimize those things, then maybe an exaggerated response that you might have to your cycle might be a lot less. So you want to optimize everything you have control over. And then hopefully that's enough to take the edge off of the stuff that biology has just dealt us.
Yeah. And if you can, change around your schedule to work with it.
Exactly.
So. Right. Like that's
Enjoy
okay
some
to
yoga.
have a mobility day. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do hormones affect your performance in hotter temperature races? Boy, I know that I always had a harder time thermoregulating during the luteal phase of my menstrual cycle. That when I started tracking, that was the one thing that I was like, oh, and there are fluid shifts that happen, with the luteal phase. So that does kind of make sense. Do you have thoughts on that in general?
Yeah, I think, again, everybody's response to their own cycle is different, but you have to pay attention to those things and know what is true of your own cycles. And, if you're feeling heat intolerance during your luteal phase, you want to make sure that maybe you hydrate more before that. And kind of just be prepared for that. Now, in perimenopause and menopause, when under normal, just sitting in the house or sitting at work circumstances, your thermoregulation seems to be going haywire. That may be exaggerated when you're training in the heat. I think Stacy Sims has written some pretty good stuff about training in the heat at midlife. You definitely want to check out her blog on that. But yeah, it's all about, like you mentioned, it's thermoregulation. And, when you're cycling, there may be certain times of the month where your thermoregulation needs a little bit of TLC. But in perimenopause and menopause, this can become very challenging because we are at rest, abnormally thermoregulating. So again, it's just being mindful of hydration and, wearing lots of layers.
And pre-cooling, like that often helps
exactly.
too. They have the ice socks you can put around your neck before you start, and just cooling yourself as best as you can throughout, just trying to keep that core temperature down.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How do hormonal changes in women over 40 affect nutritional needs and race fueling? I feel like I gain a lot of weight when I train for long races, and I'm thinking that this might not be a fueling thing, but might be back to what we were talking about with the inflammation thing. If I'm maybe picking, this sounds like, you tell me what you think. This
Yeah,
doesn't,
no, it's on the same track. It's on the
Yeah.
exact same track. Recovery might be suboptimal. You might not be getting your stress response system back to normal, but it could be fueling, because inadequate fueling is going to also be spiking the stress response. So, whenever I have somebody that comes to me and says, "Look, I'm training for this race. I'm gaining weight. What is happening to me?" The first thing we look at, okay, are you an LEA? Because what happens at this stage is that if the body thinks there's a famine, it's going to hang on to every last fat cell it can because it needs to survive. And when people try to push through that, it gets worse. People try intermittent fasting, and that even inflames it even more. So, again, same answer as some of the other questions. You want to look at what could be spiking the stress response. Are there life stressors? Are there recovery deficiencies? And is there a fueling imbalance? And, and if you can target those things, work with a coach, hopefully it will resolve.
Yeah, and it's worth a session, I think, with a sports dietitian too, because
Sure.
they can really help you. And this is going to come out maybe weird, but give you the permission to eat, because a lot of women just don't. We struggle because we came up with so much diet culture, including in sport, that we're just so disinclined to eat as much as we really need. But if you have somebody telling you, "Look, try this," it works brilliantly. So I think that that's always worth giving it a shot.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Diet culture is the reason why LEA is so rampant in women's sports. It's even there in men's sports too.
Oh yeah.
So we're not the only ones, but yeah, it's rampant. And I think it's probably the most damage that has been done to us as women is this sick and twisted diet culture, body morphology thing.
Yep, I agree. Question, my same age women friends are not slowing down one bit, but I am. Is it because my hormones are that much different, or has the message that we slow down because of changing hormones just gotten in my head? How can I unlearn this if that's true and be blissfully oblivious? I don't ever believe it's all in your head. If you are experiencing something, you are not making yourself feel that. My inclination is to say we are all just different. Like, I know people who are, and you can look around and see everybody experiences aging differently, and the hormonal experience that is menopause differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody is different. I think too, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. It's definitely not in your head. There is a lot going on at this stage of life that could be explaining that. But on the diet culture point, when you've got something hammered into your brain, like, oh my God, menopause is going to suck. This is going to be awful. This is going to be the worst. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You start to believe this stuff. And I think there is that psychological component that does exist. Same thing when you're pregnant. When you're pregnant, oh my God, you're going to be throwing up every single day. And oh my God, it's terrible. Your body is going to go to hell. It's like, well, it doesn't have to, but it just gets hammered into you. There's these times of our lives where society insists on telling us exactly the way it's going to be. And I think the same holds true for menopause too. And so it's a very big psychological dynamic that's out there. So that's not to say that it's all in your head. It's just be aware of the cultural environment that you find yourself in. And just know that your path is the path that you make it. Now, granted, we all have a biological hand of cards that we're dealt, but how you play that hand is really going to be what makes that experience for you. And so don't ever forget that. But it's hard though. I mean, I remember when I was pregnant, oh my God, I did a residency in OBGYN, and I didn't even become aware of this cultural dynamic until I became pregnant myself. So it's there, it's real, but it can be navigated.
Yeah. And I would also just say, make sure that if you're not, that you're strength training, because if you are experiencing more muscle loss, that is going to cause you to lose power. And
for sure.
Yeah, resistance. So my little plug for strength training sneaked in there.
Yes, because, and I'll plug it further just with a
Okay.
biological little tidbit is that when we stop cycling or when our cycles become irregular, then muscle mass declines because estrogen receptors on the muscle decline. And so that's
Yep.
when we have that shift from type 2 to type 1 fibers. And
Yeah.
so the way to mitigate that is through strength training. So
Amen.
yes, amen.
What should I expect coming off hormonal birth control after 15 years? Kind of depends what age you are, maybe, but I'll let you take this one. I'm sure you see this.
So it depends on the type of hormonal birth control we're talking about. Could be the IUD, it could be Depo-Provera, which is an injectable form. It could be birth control pills. Let's talk about the most common one, and that's birth control pills. Birth control pills are very low dose nowadays. Many of them are. And so oftentimes people's menstrual cycles return very, very quickly. As a matter of fact, with the fertility spin, when you come off your birth control pills, if you are, of course, still of reproductive age, the chance of getting pregnant that first month is the highest that it's going to be. So that's just something to keep in mind. Yep. And
I was like, wow, that was fast.
yeah, exactly. So usually periods come back pretty quickly, but it's not unusual for your body to have to figure things out and take some time to do that. So it could take 6, 8 weeks, sometimes 3 months. If you don't have a period back in 3 months, then you should go see a healthcare specialist to try to see what's going on. But that's probably the most common thing we see when people come off the pill is that either A, they get pregnant before they even get their first period, or B, their cycles are a little wonky before they settle out.
And what if they're like later on in sort of in the perimenopausal period?
They might get hot flashes.
Yeah, that's what I was just
They might
gonna
get
say.
hot flashes. Yeah, because the pill is, it's showing your body estrogen, and that is what can help prevent the hot flashes and a lot of those symptoms. So if you're in peri and you're still, in your 40s, early 50s, you may experience hot flashes when you come off. You may experience some sleep disturbance and just, the emergence of those symptoms. And so if that does happen, you may want to think about, okay, do I go to a lower dose pill and then maybe try to wean myself off? Or maybe you come off, see if you're actually menopausal and maybe consider menopausal hormone therapy, because you can transition directly from one to the other, depending on what age you are and what your circumstances are. So, but yeah, those are some of the more common things to expect.
Cool.
As we head into summer, rest and recovery are critical for improving sports performance, reducing stress, and living a long and healthy life. We should all invest in better sleep. So, think about the thing you lay your head on for 8 hours a night. If it's not exactly right for you, it can lead to needless tossing and turning, or worse, have you waking up with an unrelenting kink in your neck. My new Lagoon pillow has helped me improve my sleep immensely by pairing me with the performance pillow that has everything I need. So I personally was matched with the Otter pillow. Shout out to Team Otter, which I love because it has a gentle cooling effect. And I was able to choose how much stuffing I wanted in it, which is super important to me because I'm doing a decent amount of CrossFit these days and my shoulders are kind of creaky. So having a pillow that is stuffed just to the right height keeps my neck and head in exactly the right position and comfortable for the entire night. And as of fall 2023, Lagoon launched their 100% mulberry silk pillowcases. It's cool to the touch, buttery soft, and great for your skin and hair. You've got to go check out this pillowcase if you want to feel great and look great every morning. Waking up for morning workouts has never felt better. I'm refreshed and pain-free thanks to my Lagoon pillow. To check it out for yourself, go to lagoonsleep.com/performance and take the 2-minute sleep quiz to find your perfect pillow match. And then use the code PERFORMANCE for 15% off your first purchase. That's code PERFORMANCE at lagoonsleep.com/performance, whole 15% off, and the link is in the show notes. You can just click through there. For decades, running shoes have been researched, tested and designed for men. Brands have relied on the shrink it and pink it approach to sell male shoes to female customers. That's why we are so excited to be working with Hedas. Hedas designs athletic footwear for women that elevates performance, safety, and style. Hedas unlocks the science behind women's biomechanics through dedicated research, creates better shoes for women that support their longevity and performance, and establishes new design standards to promote transparency in a male-biased industry. Hedas have a lower ankle collar to reduce rubbing, a breathable mesh toe box to allow for ventilation and to allow for female toe shape, a special kind of plate in the midsole to keep tired legs going, a narrow heel cup to reduce heel slippage and take the pressure off our Achilles, and a rounded instep to create a snug fit. Hedas has 3 shoe models designed for different sessions: the Alma Cruise for long runs, the Alma Tempo for training days, and the Alma Speed for pushing the pace. I've personally been running in the Alma Cruise and I love them. It's the shoe I always wanted and never knew I needed. The fit is perfect in every way. You can get your own pair of Hedas at hedas.com and use the code Feisty20 for 20% off. That's Feisty20 at hedas.com, and it will all be in the show notes.
I'd love to hear more about how hormonal changes from peri to post-menopause affect the quality of our ligaments and tendons and the rate of healing turnover in these tissues. Tendinitis, tendinopathies seem more common. Yes, they become, and healing completely can feel impossible. Yeah, I mean, that is real. Yeah, it is. It is 100% real. And some women, I've done shows on this, and I can link them in the show notes. Some women do have success with hormone therapy if they're struggling with joint pain and joint issues. It's related to hormones. It doesn't help everybody, and a good joint health product can also help. I will let you step in and give your thoughts, Carla. What do you think?
Yeah, it's totally real. And so there's a lot going on in the joints when we start to lose our cycles and go from perimenopause to menopause. Some of those things is one, the ligaments and tendons themselves change in character. Mm-hmm. So think about an elastic band that's fresh out of the package. It's, nice and pliable and it's kind of fun to play with. Then put it out in the sun for about 2 or 3 hours. You pick up that rubber band and you go to play with it and boom, it snaps in half because it's gotten dry and it's gotten more brittle. So that's kind of like what happens when our estrogen stops cycling, because tendons and ligaments have estrogen receptors, just like a lot of other tissues. And so it's estrogen responsive. When that estrogen is no longer there, the tendons and ligaments change in character. And so this can create a heightened risk for injury. Also, it can create more inflammation. So we have that piece of it. The other piece we have is the decline in muscle mass. So I think the shoulder joint is probably the best example of this, because you have your rotator cuff muscles. And so they surround and stabilize the shoulder joint. So if your tendons and ligaments are changing, like leaving the rubber band out in the sun, and you're losing muscle mass, now that shoulder is going to become a bit more unstable because we don't have quite as much muscle as we had. And now we've got these dry rubber bands for ligaments and tendons. And that's going to create this scenario where injury may be more risky and there may be more pain and inflammation. So again, very important to do mobility work. You want to keep the gears greased, so to speak. So doing mobility work is important, and also focusing on those small muscles of the rotator cuff. There are some great exercises out there. I like crossover symmetry. That's a shoulder band program. I absolutely love that program. And just keep those rotator cuff muscles stimulated and, try to mitigate the loss of the muscle mass. And by doing those things, the mobility and the muscle work, you can really work well to stabilize the joints and to minimize the inflammation and the pain. But like you said, hormone therapy can also be helpful if someone's doing all that and it's not working. It can be helpful for some people. There's not enough data, randomized controlled trials for the societies to actually recommend it for that. But if someone's low risk and they're within that safe window, and you can really make their life better, why not try it?
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. What happens hormonally when you stop elite high performance sport? I don't know. Sometimes nothing, maybe, depending on how you've been training. What are your
Exactly.
thoughts? Yeah.
It depends, if you're an elite athlete who has struggled with irregular menstrual cycles, with the fueling imbalances or whatever, then when you stop training, then your cycles may normalize. But
Right.
what I can tell you as a fertility specialist is that there are so many retired athletes that I've taken care of who have been retired for 5, 10 years, whose periods never come back.
Huh.
Just because you cure the imbalance doesn't necessarily mean that the ovulatory dysfunction is cured as well. There isn't a real mechanism that I can explain that away with, but I see it a lot. Now, granted, I don't see the ones that don't have trouble getting
Totally.
pregnant. So I think the
Yeah.
majority of the time the cycles do come back, but there's certainly a fair number of people with eating disorders too, who are not athletes, people with anorexia, oftentimes will have lifelong irregular menstrual cycles. So most of the time, your periods might regulate if they were at all irregular during your athletic years. But if you did a good job of maintaining balance and cycles were regular then, I would fully expect for cycles to continue to be regular afterwards.
Excellent. Breastfeeding and performance. What should women know? I think this is important to talk a little bit about because, there's been a lot of really good research now on pregnancy and exercise and, women coming back. But there is, there are some things that women should know about their energy needs during breastfeeding and that, we see athletes who do come back sometimes suffering with stress fractures and that kind of injury. So I think we should talk about a bit what women should be thinking of top of mind when they are breastfeeding and training.
Yeah, this is really important. I remember when I was doing my research for the Strong course, and we were talking about strength training through various phases of life. One of the things that I came across, and this was something I had learned that I didn't know, is that bone density takes a bit of a hit during pregnancy, and it bounces back. But when one is breastfeeding, it takes a lot longer to bounce back. And I'm not sure what the exact mechanism is because you've got oxytocin and prolactin and those hormones that are circulating to keep the milk flowing. I'm not sure if it's a direct effect of those hormones on bone density, but bone density will be much slower to recover if one is breastfeeding. And then when one stops breastfeeding, it will recover at the usual rate. So if you are training in breastfeeding and you have a sport where falls and fractures are a risk, you are going to be at higher risk for this. The same thing is true with relaxin hormone. A lot of times, joints are still staying supple with the hormones of that are still continuing on with breastfeeding. That may be slower to recover too. So you just want to be very careful of dislocations and things like that. But I think the biggest thing is the bone density, and just know that you took a little bit of a hit. Be careful when you train that you're not putting yourself at excessive risk for fracture. And, once breastfeeding is completed, then, bone density should bounce back.
Okay. Well, that is our Q&A episode and is a wrap. Is there anything that you would like to leave our audience with as far as I don't know, just understanding our whole hormonal being? I think one of the things that is on my mind recently is that women are getting this message that we are a victim of our hormones, and I don't really love it. It's just like everything is, oh, it's because of your hormones. And, that's kind of one of the reasons we called the show Hormonal. And I think that on a day-to-day basis, our hormones just should be doing what they're supposed to be doing. And yes, they fluctuate over time and that can cause, some of the challenges that we have, but you're not broken. I could just, you have thoughts on that?
I do. I have a lot of thoughts on that, and you're absolutely right. this goes to the hot button topic about, is this all a hormone imbalance?
Right.
And, here's the thing. And this is why I try to put forward that the hormones aren't the issue. It's the endpoint and how the body is physiologically reacting to the hormone changes. That's where the money is and where the attention needs to focus. Because you think about two people that have a menstrual cycle and they're ovulatory. They're both having the same menstrual cycle, but one has horrible PMS and PMDD, and the other one doesn't even know her period's coming. They both have the same hormonal balance, but one person has a sensitivity to her hormones that is problematic for her. So the hormone's not imbalanced. It's the effect that needs to be managed. Now, sometimes we have to actually throw the hormones out of balance and put people on birth control pills to solve these symptoms. Ironically, people think, oh, I'm balancing my hormones. No, you're not. You're squashing your period so that you don't get your migraines. So it's not that the hormones are doing something they're not supposed to do. It's that people have different sensitivities to their own hormone fluctuations. We see it in pregnancy too. Some women have morning sickness. Some women have none. And what's happening in both women is that progesterone levels are going sky high because the placenta is producing progesterone, because that's what the placenta does. The same thing is hormonally happening in both people, but each one has a very different experience of that. Menopause, same thing. Puberty, same thing. It all goes back to what is a woman's sensitivity to her hormones. And so what we have to focus on is treating that endpoint, not saying that the hormones are broken or there's an imbalance. That's not the hormones. They're just doing what Mother Nature programmed them to do under normal circumstances. That does not mean that PCOS is not an imbalance. It does not mean that LEA. Those are true imbalances. But just the reactions to the menopausal changes, puberty changes, pregnancy changes, it's not that the hormones are a problem. It's that we have to deal with how the physiology reacts to those hormones. And sometimes we do have to manipulate the hormones to achieve relief, but other times there could be other strategies. Like with menopause, we know that muscle and bone mass are going to decline because of menopause, not because the hormones are in balance. It's because that's what happens. So what do? We train, we lift, we, take care of our bones, we fuel properly. And that's the end run. Hormones are going to do what they're going to do. And if you try to go against them, it's just like jamming a square peg into a round hole. So we kind of have to embrace that this is going to happen, but we can still tackle and conquer what those effects are on us as individuals. And so, no, we're not broken. We just need to figure out what our personal path is and use all the tools available to live our best lives.
I got nothing more to say. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned because Carla and I have some special episodes in the work over on the Hit Play Not Pause podcast. So stay tuned for those.
Thanks, Selene.